Having recently looked at various nations already represented in War Thunder, I feel we should take a look at some of the less or non-represented nations, starting with Romania. Before we look at the tanks, one of the big questions regarding Romania is how should it be added to War Thunder? If you had asked me a few months ago, I would have said add it as a subtree in the Italian tech tree, but with a few doubts on this due to the number of vehicles available. However, since then we've had the Finnish subtree, which consists of basically 3 unique vehicles and 12 copy-paste vehicles. So I see absolutely no reason Romania shouldn't be added as a subtree, especially since it had a lot more than 3 unique vehicles. Not to mention, as an important Axis and later Allied/Soviet power, it also has access to many Axis and Soviet vehicles, including but not limited to Panzer IIIs and IVs, Panzer 38Ts, Stug 3Gs, M3 Lees, T-34s, IS-2s and many more. However, for today we will be looking at the tanks designed or heavily modified by the Romanians, so let's take a look at them. The first Romanian tank we're going to look at is the R2C, which was a modified variant of the R2, which was the Romanian designation for the LT-VZ35, or as it's better known by its German designation, the Panzer 35T. The R2C was mostly the same as the R2, with the same armament, broadly the same armour thickness, mobility and crew complement. However, there are a few minor differences. The first one you might notice is at the back of the turret, where instead of one curved plate for the turret rear, we have 2 flat plates at a very shallow V angle. However, there may actually be a bigger change regarding the armour, though I've not been able to find much information about this. The C in the designation stands for Cimentate, which is Romanian for cemented. Now, according to some online sources, this refers to the use of cemented armour, presumably the type of metal armour rather than actual concrete. Without going into too much detail on various different armours, regular RHA armour is tougher but ductile, so when a shell hits it, it can travel away through the armour while being slowed down by it. It also has the same toughness throughout the plate. Cemented armour, usually referred to as face hardened, does have this same ductile armour but with the outer layer being significantly harder, though also brittle, with the idea being that the incoming shell may break upon this hard outer layer, or at least be significantly slowed down by it. However, this can be defeated via the use of capped shells, with the cap punching a hole through the armour, followed by the main projectile which can now bypass the hard outer edge. Now, War Thunder does technically represent these armours, with cemented armour on ships having a 1.10 multiplier, while high hardness armour has a 1.25 multiplier. Unfortunately, I don't know which process was used on the R2C, or which armour plates were actually treated in this way, though potentially being 10 to 25% tougher in any place is of course an advantage. Personally, I think this would still be a 1.0 vehicle, as a 1.25 multiplier on the thickest armour of the vehicle would take its effective thickness from 25mm to 31.25mm, which is an improvement but not anything to really shout about, and of course the rest of the tank with thinner armour would benefit even less from it. That said, I think it would be a good starting tank for a Romanian subtree, or just a good introduction to Romanian tanks in general. The next tank is the Vânătorul de Care R35 Transformat, or the VDC-35 for short, which is basically a Romanian upgrade to their existing R35 tanks. Romania had received 41 R35s from France in 1939, and a further 34 from Polish units that had escaped to Romania after the fall of Poland, giving them a total of 75 R35s. These tanks would go on to be used in Operation Barbarossa, and while they were liked for their thick armour, their slow speed and ineffective 37mm gun meant this tank was obsolete in any kind of tank engagement. Bearing in mind the Soviets were starting to field T-34s and KV-1s with thick armour and 76mm guns on more mobile platforms. Thus, in late 1942, work was begun to upgrade the R35s with the superior 45mm 20k gun as used on the T26, while trying to keep the original heavily armoured turret, and the Romanians were generally successful in this effort. As mentioned, the new main armament is the 45mm 20K, which has a penetration of 58mm at 500 metres with APHE BC shells, a huge improvement compared to the original 37mm SA-18's 36mm at point blank range with APCR. Elevation is -8 to +25, while turret traverse will likely remain at around 9.3 degrees a second. Armour is broadly the same, which is one of the reasons the Romanians kept the original turret, as it has 40 to 45mm of armour all around. However, the mantlet is different, and finding a figure for this is somewhat difficult. Basically, there is only one turret remaining in existence, and while it does have a mantlet, which is estimated to be around 10mm thick, this is only the internal mantlet, as there were supposed to be 2 layers of cast armour. So ultimately we don't know exactly how thick it was intended to be overall, unless somebody finds that outer layer of cast armour. I would personally guess maybe 30 to 40mm, though that is just an educated guess on my part. Mobility should remain broadly the same at 12 miles per hour or 20 kilometers an hour, though as I mentioned in my video on French tanks when talking about the R40, a modernisation of the R35, the R35 itself wasn't all that good when it came to cross-country performance, so that is something to take into account when using this vehicle. Crew complement would remain at 2, with a driver in the hull and a commander in the turret. Overall, this is a very good upgrade to the R35, though in real life by the time it was carried out the 45mm gun was already obsolete against T-34s and the like, though it did enable the VDC-35 to go toe-to-toe with lighter vehicles such as the T60, which the original R35 wouldn't be able to do. As for where it should go in War Thunder, I would suggest placing it at battle rating 1.3, as we now have a much more effective gun, but it is still hobbled by a fairly slow speed and a one-man turret, meaning this vehicle could still be flanked and taken out quickly in the event of a successful penetration. However, I think it could still be an effective tank at 1.3 and definitely much better than the existing R35 it was modified from. The first tank destroyer we will be looking at is the Tacam T60, a tank destroyer built upon captured Soviet T60 light tanks. Around the same time as they were developing the VDC-35, the Romanians were trying to find a way to convert their various tanks into tank destroyers that might actually have a chance to destroy Soviet tanks. One of these efforts went towards converting the numerous T60 tanks that had been captured from the Soviets, with the original turrets replaced with captured Soviet F-22 76.2mm artillery guns, turning the now called Tacam T60 into an effective tank destroyer. The F-22 is sort of in War Thunder, but in a modified form known as the Pak-36R, which has an armour penetration of 135mm at 500 metres with APC-BC shells. The F-22 itself seems to have had a real-life penetration of 75mm at 500 metres when using BR-350 shells. Now, this is much worse than the German converted weapons in War Thunder, though I have noticed that War Thunder stats and real-life results can differ quite significantly in some cases. The gun has a decent traverse of 32 degrees both ways and an elevation of -5 to +8 degrees. It is also fitted with a secondary armament of one 7.92mm machine gun, though I'm unsure exactly as to where it was placed. Armour should remain about the same as on the original T60, with a maximum hull thickness of 35mm. The gun mounted in place of the turret is protected by a 3-sided open-topped fighting compartment, with a thickness of 15mm. As Romanian industry was in a pretty desperate place by this time, the armour plates are actually salvaged from Russian BT-5 tanks, rather than manufactured as new. Mobility is affected a little bit, with sources stating that it has a max speed of 40 km an hour or 25 miles per hour, which is only a little bit slower than the T60 in-game, which is capable of 44 km an hour or 27 miles per hour. Crew complement is increased from 2 to 3, now consisting of a driver in the hull and a commander/gunner and loader manning the gun. The Tacam T60 seems to be a pretty capable tank destroyer, which is armed with a decent weapon and is capable of a good speed, while having an increased crew complement and having them somewhat protected will make this a tougher tank destroyer compared to the original T60 and some other tank destroyers. I personally think it should be added at a battle rating of 2.0, similar to the Marder 3s and Su-76M, and I think this would make a pretty good tank destroyer. The next vehicle is the Tacam R2, again a tank destroyer but this time based on the R2 tank, which, like most other Romanian tanks, was completely obsolete against Soviet tanks. So like with the Tacam T60, work was carried out to convert these to tank destroyers. Armament this time is the newer captured Soviet Sis-3 76.2mm gun, the same gun as used on the Su-76M in-game. It has an armour penetration of 75mm at 500 meters when using APBC shells, while having a traverse of 30 degrees both ways and an elevation of -5 to +15 degrees. It also retains its hull-mounted 7.92mm machine gun, though presumably now operated by the driver. Armour for the hull is the same as on the regular R2, while the gun itself is mounted in a three-sided fighting compartment like with the Tacam T60, but unlike the Tacam T60, it is at least partially roofed. This provides around 10 to 17mm of protection and is again made from armour removed from captured Soviet tanks. Mobility is again slightly reduced, with a top speed of 30 km an hour or 18.6 miles per hour, compared to the R2's original top speed of 33 km an hour or 21 miles per hour. Crew complement is free, consisting of a driver in the hull and the gunner/commander and loader manning the gun. I should also mention here that the Tacam R2 has a height of 2.32 meters, compared with the original R2's 2.20 meters, which kind of surprised me because personally I think that in the pictures it looks a lot bigger than that, so I just thought I'd mention that here in case anyone else thought that. Overall, this seems fairly similar to the Tacam T60, having a slower speed, similar performing gun, similar armour and same crew complement. Honestly, you could probably fold these two vehicles, as they seem to fulfill a very similar task with very similar stats. Personally, I think the Tacam R2 should also go at a battle rating of 2.0, though this could change depending on how it performs. The next Romanian vehicle is the Mareșal, Romanian for Marshal, which was a very innovative design for a tank destroyer. In fact, as you might be able to tell, it bears quite a lot of resemblance to the Jagdpanzer 38T, or Hetzer as it's more commonly known. The reason for this is that the Mareșal is credited with influencing the later German design, though due to Germany's superior industry, despite starting later, they finished and started producing their design before the Romanians. Now there are 7 different designs of the Mareșal, from M00 to M06, and I am going to use the M05 and M06 designs for this video, as these were the designs that were chosen to go into production, with there being little difference between the two vehicles, with the major difference being that the M06 has 3 crew instead of 2 for the M05. Quick disclaimer, many of the pictures that will be shown in this segment of the video will be of previous models of the Mareșal, just because there are very few photos available in general. Armament consisted of the 75mm Jder M1943, a Romanian-designed anti-tank weapon that incorporated design features from the Soviet Sis-3 and the German Pak-40, with the resulting weapon being a pretty damn good anti-tank gun. During testing, it was found to be able to penetrate a 100mm plate angled at a 30-degree angle at 500 meters, as well as a 100mm vertical plate at 1000 meters, which is again a pretty good performance. Armour was pretty thin at only 10 to 20mm thick, and although the armour is extremely sloped, it will likely be penetrated by most conventional guns, so you shouldn't be relying on your armour if at all possible. Mobility is pretty good, with a top speed of 50 km an hour or 31 miles per hour, which could make this a pretty good scoot and shoot vehicle, using your speed and small size to get into good ambushing positions before quickly relocating. The crew complement for the M05 was 2, consisting of a driver and loader. Interestingly, the driver was also responsible for aiming and firing the gun, which would make losing the driver a much worse event than compared to other vehicles. In the M06, the crew is joined by a commander, boosting the crew to 3, though the existing 2 crew members were still assigned their original roles, though whether this would be true in game or not, I'm unsure. It should also be pointed out that the Mareşal was a very small vehicle, being only 1.53 metres tall compared to the Jagdpanzer 38T, which was 2.17 metres tall, meaning it would be very easy to conceal yourself from enemies when setting up an ambush position or even just when repositioning. All in all, this is a pretty good vehicle and in many ways would play like the Hetzer, though of course with some disadvantages such as worse armour and a slightly slower speed. But overall it should be a very successful tank destroyer. So where should it go in War Thunder? Personally, I think it could go at battle rating 4.0 potentially, as its gun should perform very well at this BR and the Mareşal can carry out its role as a small tank destroyer very successfully. In this episode we will be looking at Romanian tanks of the Cold War and modern era. Of course, in the aftermath of World War II, Romania became a communist state and member of the Warsaw Pact, and as such used a lot of Soviet equipment, like the T-34-85, Su-76, Su-100, ISU-152, T-55 and the ZSU-57-2, all of which can be used to plug gaps in any Romanian subtree. However, in the aftermath of the 1968 invasion of Czechoslovakia, which Romania refused to take part in and indeed actively condemned, it lost access to much of the newer Soviet equipment, and thus decided to make itself self-sufficient with regards to armaments, leading us to the Romanian tanks that we will be looking at today. Now technically the first tank we could cover is the Romanian T-34-85s, but the modifications to these were relatively minor, for example being fitted to be able to fold up to 5 metres, getting new radios and gyroscopes, etc, etc. So while they can still be added, it would play exactly the same as the Soviet T-34-85. The first Romanian tank is the Tank Romanesque 580 or TR-580, though you will sometimes see it referred to as the TR-77 or TR-77-580 or vice versa. Depending on the source in question, the TR-77 designation refers to either the initial prototypes designed for the Leopard 1 engine or refers to export variants. Now this was Romania's first attempt at creating its own domestically designed MBT, and more importantly it was a tank design that wouldn't be reliant on the Soviet Union. At first glance this looks like a slightly upgraded T-55, but as we shall see there are some major differences over the Soviet T-55. Initially the Romanians had wanted to equip this tank with the same engine as the one used on the Leopard 1. However, in a move that really shouldn't have surprised anyone, Krauss-Maffei, the West German company responsible for building the Leopard 1, was understandably against providing engines or technical information of the Leopard 1's engine to Romania, who despite being on somewhat bad terms with the Soviet Union, was at the end of the day still a communist nation and a member of the Warsaw Pact, i.e. the main enemy of West Germany and NATO. Thus, with the engine unavailable, the Romanians only produced about 11 of the initial prototypes, again sometimes referred to as the TR-77, with work being commenced on a new design which was to use a 580 horsepower V2 engine from the T-55 that was being produced in Romania at the time, with the 580 horsepower engine giving the new project its name of TR-580. Weighing in at around 42 tonnes, the TR-580 had a top speed of around 50 km an hour or 31 miles per hour. Not too bad compared to the T-55, but no doubt much slower than originally envisioned. It was also slightly longer than the T-55, which resulted in an extra pair of road wheels, giving a total of 6 road wheels on each side, with the road wheels also being smaller than those on the T-55. The main armament still consisted of a 100mm gun, but this was now a Romanian-made A308, which was a variant of the 100mm towed anti-tank gun A407 M1977. The A308 is quite a powerful weapon, having a penetration of 444mm at 500 metres at a 90-degree angle when using the BM412SG APFS DS shell. The T-55's 100mm gun by comparison gives an in-game penetration of 336mm at 500 metres with the M1000A1 APFS DS round, though using Heat FS shells can bring that up to 390mm or 600mm if given access to the 9M117 ATGM. However, despite penetrating about 108mm more than the T55's equivalent APFS DS round, the BM412SG wasn't actually in service until the 1990s, so it's unknown if it would have access to it in War Thunder. In addition to this round, it can also fire various Soviet shells like the BR412D APC-BC shell, as well as numerous Romanian-produced shells, though these all have significantly worse performance. Lastly, the TR580 is also equipped with one 7.62mm coaxial machine gun and one roof-mounted 12.7mm machine gun. When it comes to the armour, this is greatly improved over the T55, with the TR580's frontal hull armour now consisting of two 100mm plates, giving a total thickness of 200mm, while on the turret, which is actually a new turret, though it does look similar to the T55, the frontal turret armour is now 320mm, plus an additional 20mm applique armour added on top of this. Compare this to the T55, which has a maximum frontal hull and turret armour of 100mm and 200mm respectively, and you can see that the TR580 is far better protected, making this a rather tough target to take down from the front, while side skirts provide some extra limited protection on the sides. Much like the T55, the TR580 still has 4 crew members, consisting of a driver in the hull and a gunner, loader and commander in the turret. So overall, the Romanians had made a rather good tank, with double the frontal armour of a T55, while having similar mobility and a very effective tank gun, with nearly all of these components being domestically produced within Romania, achieving its aims of producing a well-designed domestic tank, something that would of course help when designing future projects, though the TR580 itself also remains in service with these successors. As for where it would go in War Thunder, I would suggest a battle rating of around 8.3, as its armour and top performing shell make the TR580 far superior to other T55 variants, though of course this is dependent on it having access to its best APFS DS round. Potentially it could be at a lower battle rating without the BM412 shell, while later tanks could be equipped with it, helping to spread out the battle ratings Romanian tanks will be at. Nevertheless, those who use the TR580 will no doubt find it to be a rather fun tank, capable of taking down most comparable enemies, while catching some players off guard, when their shells that would normally penetrate a T55 are suddenly incapable of defeating the much thicker armour of the TR580. After designing the TR580, Romania desired to produce an improved design, this being the TR85. One way of telling the two tanks apart is that on the TR85 there is more space between the first 2 road wheels, while the rear 4 are close together. One of the most important improvements of the TR85 is that it finally has an improved engine, the 8VS A2T2, capable of producing 830 horsepower. This was a Romanian developed engine, though whether it was developed wholly by Romania or if they had managed to obtain and reverse engineer the German engine that they originally wanted is subject to some debate, though it seems that at least some of the information was obtained via spying. Despite also weighing 42 tonnes like the TR580, the new engine gives the TR85 a top speed of around 50 km an hour or 31 miles per hour, about the same as the TR580. I have seen a few sources given a top speed of 60 km an hour or 37 miles per hour, but I believe these may be referring to the modernised TR85. Nevertheless, it is still a decent speed, if not spectacular, and likely gives better acceleration over the TR580. Like with the TR580, it is armed with the same 100mm A308 gun, potentially giving it access to the BM412 shell, with its penetration of 444mm at 500 metres, as well as the other shells that gun used. It also retains the same 7.62mm coaxial machine gun and one 12.7mm machine gun on the roof. And again, like with the TR580, it retains the same armour, again giving it a maximum hull thickness of 200mm and a maximum turret thickness of 320mm, plus 20mm applique armour. Again much thicker than the regular Soviet T55s, and again it is also fitted with side skirts. And again, like with the TR580, the crew is still 4, consisting of a driver, gunner, commander and loader. While being very similar to the TR580, Due to its later introduction date and the fact it is still in service with Romania today, I would suggest placing this tank at 8.3 with the BM412 SG round, helping to differentiate this tank from the TR580 and giving a clear progression from the previous tank. Overall, this is the pinnacle of Romanian Cold War developed tanks and would be a rather useful and cool vehicle to have in War Thunder, and a good demonstration of Romanian armoured vehicle development at this time. Of course, during the 1990s, Romania decided to carry out a modernisation programme on its existing TR-85s, this being designated the TR-85 Bizonul, or Bison in English. Unlike previous efforts in tank design, Romania now had no need to focus only on domestically produced components, and indeed had free access to Western technologies, something that was desirable since it was looking to join NATO, and having a compatible equipment with NATO countries would of course be of a great benefit. Armament again remains the same with the 100mm A308 gun, though of course now it is able to use any compatible Western ammunition, though I suspect the BM412 SG round will remain one of its best shells. It also has a laser rangefinder, night vision and an advanced fire control system, enabling it to fire accurately even at long distances. It also retains the 7.62mm coaxial machine gun and the roof-mounted 12.7mm machine gun. The TR-85M1 also has a new engine, the 8VS-A2T2M, which provides 860 horsepower over the previous engine's 830 horsepower. This extra horsepower is somewhat cancelled out by the extra weight of the M1 variant, weighing in at 50 tonnes, 8 tonnes more than the regular TR-85, though it is now reported as having a top speed of 60 km/h or 30 mph, a bit faster than its predecessors, though due to having a slightly worse power to weight ratio, it will likely accelerate slower. Armour is mostly the same as on the previous TR-85, though it appears some composite armour is now used on the turret front, as well as side skirts. It also now has smoke grenades and a laser warning system, helping to bolster protection for the tank. And again, the crew still remains 4, like with the previous TR-85. When added to War Thunder, I think the TR-85M1 could go at 8.7, as it will now definitely have access to its top tier APFS-DS round, as well as the top tier Western rounds, which along with its laser rangefinder and better mobility allows it to stand on somewhat even ground against even modern Cold War tanks, though these upgrades will only take it so far against the very high tier tanks. Now of course, despite the success in creating the TR-580 and TR-85, these tanks were ultimately based on the T55, which at the end of the day was a design that was over 30 years old by 1980 and had long since been superseded by better designed tanks like the T62, T64, T72 and T80. Romania had attempted to get a license from the Soviet Union to produce the T72, but this was refused, though it was agreed that 30 T72s could be sold to Romania. With these in hand, Romania set about reverse engineering the T72s in order to produce a new design. Despite being reverse engineered from the T72, this new tank, named the TR-125 or P125, is not an exact copy, something which can easily be seen in its size, with the TR-125 being longer, taller and wider than the regular T72, necessitating the use of a 7th pair of road wheels over the T72's 6 pairs. The main armament is a 125mm A555 smoothbore gun, which should have about the same characteristics as the T72's 125mm gun, though I've not been able to find much information on it. In addition to this, it has a 7.62mm coaxial machine gun and one 12.7mm machine gun mounted on the roof. Armour is increased over the T72, with a maximum turret thickness of 400mm for the mantlet and 320mm for the turret front, while the whole front is now 200mm. However, this comes at the expense of some of the side and rear armour, making this a very hard to take down tank from the front, while increasing its vulnerability to flanking enemies. Despite weighing in at 50 tonnes compared to the T72's 41.5 tonnes, due to the use of a more powerful 900 horsepower engine, the TR-125 retains a top speed of 60 km/h or 37 mph, about the same as the regular T72, and the TR-125's compatriots like the TR-85M1, allowing the heavier TR-125 to keep up with its allies. The crew complement is much the same as on the other T-72 variants, consisting of a driver in the hull and a commander and gunner in the turret, the loader of course being replaced by an autoloader. In real life, very few TR-125s were constructed, somewhere between 3 and 10, and ultimately the project was cancelled in 1991. However, I feel it could still be a good alternative to the T-72 for Romania, being introduced at around battle rating 9.3 to 9.7. While it does have better armour, I suspect this will not be enough to allow it to survive battlefields in the very high battle ratings, where newer ammunition types will of course negate its advantage in armour. However, it is still better than the T-72A, so can still compete against enemies that the T-72 would be expected to meet, and I think the TR-125 would be a good heavier tank for players using Romanian tanks to use, offering a good progression from the previous TR-85s. Much like the tanks we've already talked about, Romania also worked to produce its own domestically designed IFV, this being the MLI-84, based on the chassis of the Soviet BMP-1, which the Romanians already had a license to produce. One of the big differences between the BMP-1 and the MLI-84 is that the latter has a more powerful engine, using an 8-cylinder 360 horsepower engine compared to the BMP-1's 6-cylinder 300 horsepower engine. This allows the MLI-84 to have a top speed of 70 km an hour or 43 miles per hour, compared to the BMP-1's 65 km an hour or 40 miles per hour. It is also longer, wider and taller than the BMP-1, while also now weighing 16.6 tonnes. Considering the BMP-1 weighed 13.2 tonnes, the MLI-84 is still somehow supposedly capable of amphibious operations, though I suspect it may be a more perilous operation than on the BMP-1. The main armament on the MLI-84 is much the same as the BMP-1, being armed with the 73mm 2A28 Grom, with its main heat shell capable of penetrating 300mm of armour. It also carried the 9M14 Malyutka missile, capable of penetrating 400mm of armour, so this has the same lethality as the BMP-1. In addition to these, it still carried a 7.62mm coaxial machine gun and a 12.7mm machine gun mounted at the rear of the vehicle, though how this would work in game I'm not sure, since it doesn't look like it could really be manned on the move. Armour is thin like with the BMP-1, barely capable of keeping out even 50 cal rounds, while its crew complement numbers 3, consisting of a driver, gunner and commander, plus up to 8 infantry. Like with the regular BMP-1, the MLI-84 would probably go at about battle rating 7.3, as this is more of a side grade from the BMP-1, having a slightly higher max speed and potentially a 12.7mm machine gun at the rear, while being worse for amphibious operations and being a slightly bigger target. Nonetheless, it would still be a good start to the Romanian IFVs. And again, like with the T-85, Romania decided to upgrade its MLI-84s after the Cold War, giving us the MLI-84M1, with the original turret replaced with a new one carrying a 25mm Oerlikon cannon, with its APDS ammunition having an in-game penetration of 73mm at 500 meters. It is also equipped with the Spike LR missile, capable of destroying tanks with ERA armour, especially when using the tandem warhead, and according to some sources it has a penetration of up to 700mm, making this a very powerful weapon indeed. The engine of the M1 is also improved, now being a Caterpillar C9 diesel engine capable of producing 400 horsepower. However, despite being a more powerful engine, the max speed is actually reduced to 65 km an hour or 40 miles per hour, partly due to the increase of weight from 16.6 tonnes to 17.6 tonnes. Width and height are increased further over the initial MLI-84, now being 3.3 metres wide and 2.9 metres tall, though the length remains the same at 7.3 metres. Armour would again remain thin as with the previous model, and the crew complement also remains the same at 3, consisting of a driver, gunner and commander, plus again up to 8 infantrymen. When added to War Thunder, I would suggest placing the MLI-84M1 at around battle rating 8.7, as this seems somewhat similar to the BMP-3, at least with regards to the armament. Overall, I think it would be a rather good Romanian IFE, and competitive even in the higher tiers. As well as tanks and IFEs, the Romanians wanted ancillary vehicles to be produced domestically, one of these being the OAPR Model 89, which is a self-propelled howitzer design similar to the Soviet 2S1 Gvozdika, built using a lengthened MLI-84 chassis. The turret and 122mm howitzer are the same one from the 2S1, though the 122mm gun was redesignated as the A565. The howitzer is capable of firing HE and HEAT-FS shells, with the latter capable of penetrating up to 460mm of armour, though some sources suggest an even higher figure, but even the lower figure is pretty good. The shell carrying capacity of the Model 89 is 40 shells, more than enough for any match. Armour is thin, just enough to stop shrapnel and small arms fire, while the max speed is slightly better than the 2S1's at 64 km an hour or 40 miles per hour, compared to the 2S1's 60 km an hour or 37 miles per hour. Lastly, the crew complement is 4, consisting of a driver, gunner, loader and commander. Placing artillery-like vehicles in War Thunder is always difficult, but the OAPR Model 89 would likely play much the same as the 2S3M in the Soviet tech tree, so a battle rating of about 6.3 would probably be a good place for it, where it would be pretty effective and would give us a pretty cool top-tier tank destroyer-like vehicle for Romania. We now come to the Romanian SPAA vehicles, the first of these being the Tab 77, which I think would play much like the Soviet BTR-152. This is essentially a BTR-70 APC built under license by Romania, though it has been fitted with a new turret from the Tab 71, which is capable of much higher angles of fire, and it is fitted with two 132 horsepower diesel engines instead of the two 120 horsepower petrol engines of the BTR-70. Its main armament is relatively light, consisting of one 14.5mm machine gun and one 7.7mm machine gun, meaning this would be lightly armed compared to higher tier SPAA, though it is still an acceptable armament for the lower tiers. The max speed is still 80 km or 49.7 miles per hour, though it is better able to traverse obstacles due to the extra horsepower. It is also capable of amphibious operations, which could bring some extra tactical options to the table. Armour is very light, only a maximum of 9mm or so, while the crew complement is 2, being a driver and gunner, with the option of carrying 9 passengers. No doubt this would be added at a low battle rating, perhaps 2.3 to 2.7, as this is very similar to the BTR-152, having the advantage of having a fully enclosed turret while having one less heavy machine gun to use against aircraft. Nonetheless, it would be a good start to Romanian SPAA, and would be quite the threat against enemy aircraft. Following the Tab 77, we have the CA-95, which seems to be very similar to the Soviet 9K31 Strela 1, being armed with 4 surface-to-air missiles, possibly the 9M31s or something very similar, making this a rather lethal SPAA for any aircraft within 2.6 miles or 4.2 kilometers of the CA-95, or at the very least preventing aircraft from attempting to engage enemies within range of the vehicle. Armour is light at a maximum of 14mm, just enough to protect against small arms fire, while mobility is pretty good, having a top speed of 90 km an hour or 56 miles per hour, while the crew complement is 3, consisting of a driver, gunner and commander. I would suggest adding the CA-95 at around battle rating 9.0 to 9.3, as its missiles are not the longest ranged in the world, while its high mobility will allow it to quickly relocate around the battlefield, surprising enemy pilots and giving mobile cover to friendly units. So anyway, that's it for today's video looking at Romanian tanks. This has been one of the longer videos to research and record, and no doubt I've probably missed some vehicles or information due to language barriers, but I thoroughly enjoyed learning more about the Romanian armoured vehicles of the Cold War and modern era, and hope you have too. So anyway, thank you for watching the video, hope you've enjoyed it and will join me for future videos. I've been Toreno, and I'll see you next time.